Good evening, folks. It's been a beautiful day here in the swamps of Washington, D.C. You can't beat the weather in the springtime. The cherry blossoms are out. No need to adjust your screen. I am not Matt Schlapp. I am not Mercedes Schlapp. I'm your utility infielder and Sherpa for the afternoon. Ian B. Walters, Communications Director for ACU and CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference. We're going to try to jump right in here and make some sense of this crazy world. I'm joined by my friend, ally, colleague, board member, and the CEO of Quantum Communications, our ACU Vice Chairman from Harrisburg, PA, Charlie GEROW. Charlie, how are you?
It's great to be with you, Ian. I'm sorry that I'm not there to enjoy the cherry blossoms in the city where sound travels faster than light.
Harrisburg's not a bad place to be this time of year, I imagine. Let me throw this at you first. I am fascinated by watching all of these corporations over the past 2 weeks become obsessed making statements about the Georgia election law that was just passed. This is the bill that President Biden is linking to the horrific Jim Crow stuff that happened after the Civil War. He continues to call these Jim Crow laws. They seem like pretty common sense measures if anybody's read the bill. But you've got United Airlines, American Airlines, Delta, Coca-Cola, all of these traditionally blue chip solid companies, Charlie, that we're watching get woke before our eyes. What are they thinking? I'm not a corporate guy. You interacted in the private sector a whole lot more than I do. What do you think is the thinking in these boardrooms these days?
Well, sadly, Ian, a lot of it is reflexive. It's knee-jerk reaction. Unfortunately, it appears that very few of them actually read the Georgia law, because they wouldn't be saying some of the things that they've said if they'd actually looked at the law. And, you know, they have opposition to voter ID. Most Americans understand that voter ID is simply common sense. You can't get on a plane, train, or rent an automobile without voter ID. You can't walk into the corporate headquarters of Coca-Cola or Delta Airlines without a photo ID. And you can't even pick up a ticket at the will call window of a Major League Baseball game without photo ID, but they think that somehow you ought to be allowed to vote without one.
What's the business calculation here? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me that if you're Coca-Cola, you know, Matt Schlapp sent out a tweet earlier this week. He says, I'm switching to Diet Pepsi. I think he said, I'm very happy not drinking my Diet Coke and on a Delta airplane. Conservatives are getting smart about how they use consumer dollars, whether that's unsubscribing from Netflix, whether that's unsubscribing from Amazon Prime. Some of these ideas that, you know, that you're opening up your wallet to essentially fund you know, the woke leftist mob's activities here. What's the business calculation for Coca-Cola? Don't they know they're upsetting conservatives? Don't they know that calling decent, reasonable people who are having a policy disagreement Jim Crow racist is a bad business move and is going to have people drink less of their precious sugar water? I don't know. What's the business calculation? Shouldn't this hurt their bottom line?
Corporate America, Ian, historically and traditionally got involved in politics where it directly affected their enterprise. But now they're into the so-called social justice movement. They're going to jump in whenever the social justice advocates tell them they should. And it hasn't worked for them. I mean, if you look at what happened with Goya, you see the prime example of what conservatives are doing with their money. And that's what we should be doing. We should be walking away from Major League Baseball, from the NBA. You know, I'm a sports guy, as you know, former jock. I love sports now as a spectator, and it pains me to think that I'm not going to be watching Major League Baseball games as much as I used to. But at some point, we have to vote with our dollars, and I think that the time has come.
Explain to our audience, you brought up Major League Baseball. What happened? The All-Star game was supposed to be down in Atlanta this year. Jen Psaki, of course, tried to walk back Joe Biden's influence, affecting that move. But lay out in a comms and political way, not just what we see on the news. What the heck happened down there, and how did it end up in Colorado?
Well, clearly Joe Biden did have something to do with it, regardless of what Jen Psaki now wants us to believe. He stuck his finger on the scale pretty hard. called the Georgia law sick, and all sorts of stuff that didn't comport with reality, by the way. And so Major League Baseball quickly chipped in and said, well, we'll move the All-Star game out of Atlanta, which hurt Atlanta citizens, and move it to Colorado. Now, as you know, Atlanta has a very large minority population. Almost half the population there is minority, whereas in Denver, Colorado, they have a very, very small minority population. So once again, they've hurt the people that they claim to want to help. But more importantly, the stuff that they've said as justification for doing this simply isn't true. And with, the access to the ballot, which is what they're all chirping about, Georgia has much more access to the ballot than Delaware, for example, where Joe Biden comes from, or New York, where Major League Baseball is headquartered.
Charlie, this makes absolutely no sense making that move. One of the things that they were going to do in Atlanta was honor the home run champ Hank Aaron, who had a great career there as part of the Atlanta and Milwaukee Braves. So I don't think that that's going to happen in Colorado. Let me ask you, we've all learned over the past year about how the NBA is more concerned with making their product available to 1 billion folks in China than they are to standing up for freedom here in America. When they had the jerseys over the last season, people tried to order free Hong Kong jerseys. That was not permitted on an actual NBA uniform. You could say anything else that you wanted to say, but I've learned recently that Major League Baseball is very interested in getting their product, American baseball, in front of that billion-person Chinese market. This is an absurd question, Charlie. Charlie, are the Chinese trying to take the American pastime away from America?
Well, you've got to wonder what Major League Baseball is thinking in this regard. They have a contract now with a Communist Party, Chinese Communist Party controlled enterprise, and they have more concern about voter ID cards in Georgia than they do about slave labor and the repression of rights in China. It's really, really scary.
And you understand that in order to go pick up your Orioles tickets, your Phillies tickets at will call, you've got to show an ID. You can't just show up and say, give me my tickets. They require an ID for you to get on an airplane, for you to pick up tickets to go see the Orioles up at Camden Yards. These are basic things that everybody in American society knows how to do. And the notion that some folks who live in cities are so incompetent that they can't figure out how to go to the DMV and get a voter ID, my friends, is racist. That is a racist proposition. Just ask anybody you know whether they have an ID or not. We've all figured out how to get an ID. Charlie, we're going to listen to Ted Cruz and hear what he had to say about some of the gun violence that we've seen here in America, and then talk about what Joe Biden wants to do with this executive order that he's threatening to do. Let's hear from Ted real quick.
Senator from Connecticut just said, it's time for us to do something. I agree. It is time for us to do something. And every time there's a shooting, we play this ridiculous theater where this committee gets together and proposes a bunch of laws that would do nothing to stop these murders. Senator from Connecticut just said the folks on the other side of the aisle have no solutions. Well, the senator from Connecticut knows that is false. And he knows that's false because Senator Grassley and I together introduced legislation, Grassley-Cruz, targeted at violent criminals, targeted at felons, targeted at fugitives, targeted at those with serious mental disease, to stop them from getting firearms, to put them in prison when they try to illegally buy guns.
Charlie, that was Ted Cruz. It makes a whole lot of sense. The fact is that there is evil in this world, and whatever legislation gets passed in the wake of tragedy may not have that much impact on future tragedies. What's your sense of where we're at, the uptick in violence? I think it's a result of lockdown culture and a pandemic of depression and misery after 2020. And obviously that's harmful to people in their whole physiology. That's all becoming commonly regarded. But what do we do about leftists, President Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, who want to take away the rights of law-abiding citizens, decent people who use it for home protection or use it for hunting out there in Western Pennsylvania?
Well, unfortunately, these very tragic shootings ramp up a lot of emotional response. And Ian, it's not legislation that we're talking about here. It's yet another executive order from the pen of Joe Biden. And as conservatives, we have to be very, very concerned about governing by executive order. It's not regular order where the legislature, i.e. the Congress of the United States, makes laws and the executive branch administers and executes them. What we've got now is a situation that's turned completely on its head. And the old adage of when you outlaw guns, only the criminals are going to have guns is true. We take away the rights of individual law-abiding citizens who want to own guns for a variety of legitimate reasons, and the criminals still have them. We're going to be going down to Brazil, where I was born, for CPAC Brazil in a couple of months. There, gun violence is a huge problem, probably their most significant social problem. And guess what? Individual ownership of guns is completely illegal. A regular, ordinary citizen can't own a gun, and yet guns are rife down there because the criminals all have them. And the law-abiding folks are screaming and crying for the opportunity simply to defend themselves, much less hunt and use them for sport and marksmanship, etc.
Chicago, New York, LA, Washington, D.C. here have all seen upticks in violence in the past few months, and they have passed at the local level some of the most restrictive Second Amendment, anti-Second Amendment bills in those urban areas, and that seems to prove your point, Charlie. Charlie, after 2020, after the misery, after being told you can't go to church, now we're being told you can't say certain things. We often have this conversation here in the office with, our friend and colleague Dan Schneider about the Constitution. For 8 years under Obama, liberals neglected the Constitution. We got to Trump, and it's like, thank goodness we've got the Constitution, says the American left. And now we're actually talking about Joe Biden, with the stroke of a pen, altering the Constitution. I mean, it's akin to saying, okay, well, we're going to limit your right to speak freely. We're going to limit your right to peaceably assemble, all of the things that are in the First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, search and seizure. Well, we'll just make that disappear instead of using the mechanisms that are actually in the Constitution, how to change the document. Is he able to do this politically? Because we've had so many of those rights taken away from us in 2020, the right to go to church, the right to speak freely, being told you can't do that, you can't do that. And are people just numb to it? They're going to let it happen. I don't think gun owners are going to let it happen. But what about average citizens? Are they thinking straight on this thing?
I think you're going to see a tremendous uprising from average citizens, Ian, in the midterm elections in 2022. I think you're going to see the country going back very, very quickly to the constitutional foundations that you just mentioned and we've all talked about, because freedom is at the core of who we are as Americans, and the protection of our God-given liberties by the United States Constitution is so central to everything we are and believe. And it's being stripped away from us daily by the Biden administration and by the progressive left in this country. And I think you're going to see a tremendous backlash. I also believe, Ian, and I'm very hopeful of this anyway, that you're going to see the court step in and say enough is enough to Joe Biden and his edicts, particularly his infringement on the Second Amendment rights of every American.
I think that's a smart take, and we'll just see how much the American left can get away with before those important elections. They cannot come soon enough for a lot of people. Liberals are, I should say leftists, are very good. You're a student of the English language. I'm a student of the English language at redefining terms. The one that really stuck in my craw this week was the new redefining of the word infrastructure. If you go to the dictionary and you look it up, it's quite literally roads and bridges and the systems that make a society work, that are physical and that are tangible. We're in this new infrastructure bill that Joe Biden has put forth. We're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars to develop new green tech, tens of millions of dollars to support climate change research and a whole host of other things that don't have anything to do with infrastructure. How do folks in Pennsylvania, are they seeing through the charade? I love Western Pennsylvania so much. As you know, my old man was from Pittsburgh, and it's good people up there that work hard, and blue collar folks that will do anything they have to do to put food on their table and for their families. Are folks in Western Pennsylvania seeing through the BS that this huge monstrosity of a bill and how it's going to affect them and actually make their lives worse? It's just flushing taxpayer money down the toilet, Charlie.
You bet they are, Ian. And, the left has been very good at redefining things and taking words that sound very good and applying to them very, very bad public policy. I mean, the COVID relief package was another example of gargantuan spending that had very little to do with what its title would suggest. And the quote unquote infrastructure bill is anything but roads and bridges. It's a tiny portion of that gigantic $2 trillion+ package that actually has to do with roads and bridges. You've got childcare stuffed in there, and really it's the Green New Deal masquerading as an infrastructure bill. When President Biden came to Pittsburgh to announce this package, a local organized labor leader stood up and said, "This guy comes to Pittsburgh, the home of coal and steel and natural gas, and tells us that he's going to use our money, taxpayer money, to put us out of business and take away Pennsylvania jobs. Not so fast." And I think therein lies the political problem for the American left and a real opportunity for us as conservatives, because President Trump reformed the Republican Party in many ways into a working people's party. And you see that here in my home state of Pennsylvania, particularly on the western side, but across the Commonwealth.
I think you and I are of the same mind. Charlie GEROW, our vice chairman. There is a real political opportunity here for conservatives to come together to broaden the coalition. What you have on the left is actually a very small, militant minority of folks who are passionate and devoted and are willing to fight for these absurd proposals that people are going to feel in their pocketbooks. They're going to feel it in the content that they watch on their phones. It's going to hit their bills. It's going to hit their energy bills when it gets cold. It's already hitting people's gas tanks. People already are paying more in order to be able to get to their job. So I'm just so pleased that you got to join us and that we get to work together and that you see things clearly. You always make me smarter. Thanks for joining us, Charlie GEROW, and making our audience smarter and helping us make some sense of the week that was and all the craziestness that we see around us. We'll be back in just a moment with our next interview with Grant NEWSHAM from KCPAC here at CPAC Now. And we're back. Thanks for joining us on our next interview here on CPAC Now on this beautiful Thursday here in Washington, D.C. If you haven't checked out the CPAC documentary, it's on Amazon, it's on YouTube. You can go to our ACU channel. CPAC The World is Watching. It details a lot of our travels, not just around America, but also around the world, to Brazil, to Japan, to Hong Kong. One of those places that we went was to Korea to stand with our friends, allies, and partners and solid conservatives there at KCPAC, at Korea CPAC. And it gives me great pleasure to bring to our audience the president of KCPAC, Grant NEWSHAM. Grant, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Glad to be here.
You guys have issued a very important report about the elections in South Korea of 2020. This happened in April of 2020. And there's a great deal for us in America to learn from what you and the experts over there in analyzing the ballots in Korea have determined. Tell us what you found in your report, Grant.
What we found and what we focused on was the April 15th, 2020 election for Korea's National Assembly. And that's like our Congress and Senate put together. And what happened was there was an overwhelming and surprised many people victory for the incumbent party of President Moon Jae-in. And it was so overwhelming that it gave Moon the ability to pass any legislation he wants. The opposition can do nothing more than complain. And with 3 more votes peeled off from somewhere, he can change the Constitution. Now, such things happen, but what happened in this case was that Korean citizens, very regular people, citizens, you had journalists, politicians, lawyers, statisticians, and as I said, just regular citizens said, something's wrong here. And they went to work and they dug up considerable evidence of electoral irregularities, which is a nice way of saying probable fraud. And KCPAC Korea supported this effort. And what we have done just the other day is we have put all of the research, the analysis, the reports together into one single volume. It's 2 volumes, actually. And it's available. We've documented, we've memorialized, and we've preserved the evidence of what happened. This very serious challenge and threat to the electoral system of South Korea, which to date previously had been a pretty well-run system that had been brought about at considerable effort by the population to have a democracy. And now it looks like it was subverted in the last election. And this is something that we have tried to draw attention to so that people can weigh the evidence in by themselves and make their own decisions. And so that's what we've done, and it's been a substantial effort. We just got this released, and it looks pretty good.
So you mean to tell me here, make sure that I've got it right, that it appears that there were voting irregularities that resulted in single-party control between an executive branch and a legislative branch, making it easier for the leftists in South Korea to get their way. Do I have that right?
Well, that's it. And that is a pretty juicy prize if you can pull it off. If you think about it, to have the ability to pass anything you want, and if you can change the Constitution, you can make it even easier to stay in power forever.
Walk us through some of the allegations. I've had a chance to go through the report, and before we wrap up, I want to give you the opportunity to let all of our viewers know where they can read this important report. But there are instances that you and your experts and team have uncovered about, look, the way my understanding is the way you vote, you can vote outside of your district, and then those ballots get sent to your original home district. But there's no way that some of these ballots could have made it from a polling place A back to the home district in the amount of time based on the franking of the envelopes. Walk us through some of these irregularities and explain the instances where it doesn't seem to line up quite properly.
Sure, and you just mentioned one of them, and a very well-respected Korean lawyer afterwards looked at the postal records of huge number of mail-in ballots, and he, as you said, he looked at it. He said, this doesn't make sense. You have ballots which have taken 15 minutes to go 45 miles. You have ballots which were sent across town and traversed the country 3 times. The delivery records, the people they were delivered to, was written. The names didn't make sense in Korean. It was almost as if a foreigner had written it. And he concluded that upwards of 1 million ballots were suspect, and he reckons they're fraudulent. But then you also had the usual problems. You had harassment of the opposition in the polling places. You had votes that polling sites where a vote was cast every 4.7 seconds. Try doing that. You have places with more votes than voters. You have physical evidence of pristine ballots, stacks of them, all marked for the ruling party, for Moon Jae-in's party. And then you also had something else which is very strange. If you look at Korea's electoral system, the hardware, the computer system, it's a very simple network. And what it has is effectively one main server at the National Election Commission, and it connects to every polling site, connects to the voter rolls, etc., connects to the counting machines. And this system, I say, it's so simple that once you're in, you can go anywhere you want. And there's Chinese parts in the system. Huawei, the famous Chinese surveillance company, has helped produce this equipment in some cases. And the whole thing is, it wouldn't even cause a sort of a beginning computer hacker to break a sweat. That's how simple it is. And the
Grant,
national
who's behind this? Is this Chinese meddling? You mentioned Huawei. Is this North Korean meddling? Are these political operatives that are harassing folks at the polling place from what's now the majority party, from the DP there? Who's behind this, or is it a combination?
Well, it's generally a combination, and you would have, and keep in mind that the Moon Jae-in administration, these are very extreme radicals. If you go back and look at what they did when they were student activists, look at what they said. Very pro-North Korea, pro-China. They see America as the enemy. And they've never renounced this, never said, look, we were young, we were stupid. Instead, they've just sort of kept their mouths shut and tried to present an image of just honest Democrats, but say that they have a track record, you can see it. So there's a compelling case that there was Chinese involvement in this. I think given what we know of Chinese hacking and of just about everything around the world, there's a real prize here to be had if you can get a friendly regime in power in South Korea forever. But as noted, the system, if you look into it, and the few experts that have gotten a glimpse of it have said, this is really vulnerable, this is really bad. And as importantly, the Korean National Election Commission, allegedly it's impartial, but it's not. They have refused to allow any sort of serious, much less forensic examination of the machines, of the software, either before, after, or during the election. And that is fundamental.
That sounds familiar, Grant. I think I've heard that somewhere before. Before I let you go, where can folks read this important report so that they can do the deep dive on their own time?
Okay, if you go to www.cpackorea.com, and that's CPAC Korea, Korea.com, you can find it. And there's a lot in there. And as I said, we've put this in so people can make up their own minds. It would be good to have these electoral institutions like the Carter Center take a look at it. And it'd be good to have the international community, the election watchdog groups, such as the Carter Center, the OSCE, have them send observers to the next presidential election in Korea, and just to make sure that the Korean electoral system is being run honestly.
We know exactly how important it is for people to be able to trust that there is a fair election process and that they can have confidence in the results. We see how much damage that has caused us here in America, and we're going to keep our eye on what's happening at South Korea. Thank you, Grant Newsham, the president of KCPAC. That's our partner group, our sister organization, KCPAC. Go to www.cpackorea.com and you can see the fine report that they did on the voting irregularities that will ring a bell if you're following HR 1, if you're following what is happening here in America. It is a fascinating read, and there are lots of parallels and lots of things to learn from. Thanks again, folks, for joining us for another edition of CPAC Now. It's Thursday. We'll see you next week. Same CPAC time, same CPAC channel, 7 p.m. every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Don't forget to follow us on all of your social media channels at CPAC. How do you spell it? It's right over my shoulder. It's right there at CPAC on Facebook, on Twitter, on Parler, on Instagram. And let me also do a final plug. Be sure to follow our friends KCPAC on Twitter too. We often retweet a lot of their content, but we want to support the good work that they're doing. Grant Newsham, thanks for joining us. And we'll be back next week on Tuesday. I presume Matt and Mercedes will be back here at the anchor desk here at ACU CPAC headquarters for another edition at 7 p.m. of CPAC Now.